Welcome to Change Shapers, the podcast where we know that the only certainty is uncertainty. We know everybody hates change, so we're on a mission to inspire people to see change differently. Our guest lineup of thought leaders, innovators and transformation pioneers will guide us through uncertainty and discover new opportunities which arise in these interesting times. Today, we're joined by Bud Johnston, a genuine achiever in cultivating culture and community within organisations. Whether it's as a professional basketball player, a TEDx talker, or a community leader, his goal is always to drive positive change, supporting businesses and spearheading initiatives for marginalised communities. Bud takes us on a journey of why it's important for people to see the impact of change and how organisations can move away from ESG and DEI being mere tick box exercises. Welcome, and this episode we are joined by Bud Johnston, who has had an illustrious career working in professional sports through media, FMCG, finance and the third sector, as well as leading multiple community organisations, including Barco and Men of Melanin. More on those two later. Recently, he founded Boxless Limited, a company specialising in ESG and DEI to help organisations unlock opportunities and cultivate their communities. Bud, welcome.
Good morning.
Morning. We're really happy for you to join us. There's a lot of exciting work that you've been doing. But first of all, outside that introduction, can you just give us a little bit on who you are, what you do, and how you got started?
Yeah, sure. So, look, who am I? I'm just a regular guy. I've found that I've got some skills within the commercial space, and as you pointed out, I've had different roles in different sectors and industries. But I've also got a kind of natural leadership ability, if you like, that I think very much was born from me during my days playing sport. And I've carried that over into some of the community work that I've been doing over the last 4 years. And just reached a point really where it was, well, why don't I combine that commercial and community experience together? And it certainly aligns with my passions and values. And I think that's, we'll talk about that later. That's certainly how I see success being built, is when people are working on things that they're passionate about, that they enjoy, that they love. So I think that's how I describe my answer to that question.
Bud, in a nutshell there. And Boxless, you started this company quite recently. What was the inspiration for starting that company, and what's the kind of ethos behind Boxless?
Lots. I think personal experience obviously comes into it, so that lived experience about things that you see and go through within employment certainly shapes where you'd like to see improvements, make improvements, and have an impact. In terms of opportunity as well, we've been talking about sustainability, the environment for many, many years. There's lots of conflicting information and viewpoints out there, and we certainly haven't cracked it or got a global stance on how we should move forward. And more recently, we've got this kind of social awareness around just kind of how we treat people, particularly within the workplace. And so there's quite a high employee demand for that recognition from their employers to do better. So for me, that opportunity was like, well, I think this is a really good time to help, particularly with some of the smaller businesses that are lacking in direction and strategy of how to do that. So I kind of looked around, and you're like, no one's really helping here. There's no kind of one size fits all approach. It's very, very, if you want to do it, do it. There's no kind of guidance. So my brain was like, well, I think a hand-holding opportunity would be good.
Amazing. And let's get into the acronyms a little bit. DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion; ESG, environmental, social and governance. Kind of, what do you see as the main challenges and opportunities that you've encountered when supporting companies on the ESG or DEI culture?
Okay, so I think if we start with the challenges, so leadership is a challenge, right? And leadership buy-in is certainly where we see a lot of challenge. And there's many reasons for that. There's valid reasons for that. Leaders of the business are going to be um, dedicating their time to running the business, to ensuring that they're making profit, hitting targets, budgets, etc., right? All crucial stuff that can't go away. So what that does is it feeds into the other area of significant issue, which is resource. Um, there tends not to be dedicated people in the organisation that can look at things like ESG and DEI. What tends to happen more often than not um, is someone in the business that has an interest in sustainability or diversity, inclusivity, will kind of put their hand up or be asked to kind of take leadership and ownership of these
Yeah.
responsibilities. Another area that we often see is HR. That's a human resources thing. HR will look at that when in fact these aren't HR, and they shouldn't be given to somebody in the organisation that happens to have a bit of interest, or they may be the only female or the only person of colour in the business, and suddenly they're the lead on diversity and inclusivity. So these are the kind of typical challenges that we see with organisations. Bigger organisations will tend to have something in place, but certainly those small to medium enterprises, the SMEs, those that are aware of their responsibilities, won't necessarily have that resource in place. And that's certainly where Boxless is positioned, is to fill that gap, is to lead for you. What we're seeing again, if you talk about ESG, and the reason that I like to separate DEI outside of the kind of social pillar within environmental, social, and governance, is it's a big pillar. Um, you know, there's lots of cliche statements, right, in business, that people are your biggest asset and all these types of things. Well, if that's the case, that certainly supports this argument that the social pillar is a massive pillar. And the way that people expect to be treated and the expectations that people have from their employer is a moving landscape, right? It's always going to change and diversify. And one of the things that we talk about quite frequently is this idea of EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusivity, right? So equality, if we take that as the example, like, that is the minimum expectation of anything, that we should have equality.
Absolutely.
And if we're still trying to implement equality in policies, I feel like we're failing. So equity serves as a much better term to provide the opportunities that certain individuals need to give them that equality. So it's the moving landscape with the terminology, but also the recognition of what's required.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting focus, and I think quite often especially with DEI, there's an idea that a lot of businesses are just it's a tick box exercise, isn't it? And similarly with sustainability efforts, do what needs to be done in terms of legislation or kind of outward approach, but actually, how do you really get not just the company to invest in it, but people to really make sure it's part of their vision, their culture, the whole strategic approach. And how do you go about that? Kind of engaging every stakeholder within a company to see the benefits of change and choose to buy in.
So we like to take the approach of the inverted pyramid. So traditional leadership and business models will have that kind of pyramid of leadership, where you've got leaders, business owner at the top, middle management, leaders in that sort of midsection, and at the bottom, everyone else. If we flip that around and we have an inverted pyramid, that base, that wide part of the pyramid, is where all the diversity and great ideas and perspectives come from. It's where all the information is. And if you filter that down through the managers and the leaders, the people that the business have appointed and said, we think you're great to be able to lead, you have an ability to lead and inspire people. By the time those ideas bounce around in management, once they reach the leaders of the business, they'll be much more polished. So I think it's super important at the moment that we try and do things differently. That sort of those traditional business models, they they've come from a history of kind of archaic ways of doing things. And
Absolutely.
it's not to point the finger and criticize, but we're talking about norms that were adopted from the Industrial Revolution. We're far past that now,
Yeah.
and without getting too political and philosophical, there's a lot of structures in place at the moment. The education system, et cetera, that are ancient and need updating. And I
Mm.
think these voices and people speaking about it and challenging it is certainly where I see that change starting to happen.
Without going into specific with your clients, but how would you kind of go about, what's the first step in getting a company to be aware of that? If there is a need for leadership change, if there is a need for kind of cultural, strategic approach to change, what's like the first step? Would it be assessment, auditing? Like, how do you go in as Boxless to a company?
Yeah, so I mean, the first one is a frank conversation. Why are you doing
Yeah.
this? And many people talk about the why, the Simon Sinek, the golden circle. The why is super important. And I think what we've seen with organisations who haven't done very well in this but have tried is
Mm.
because they don't have a why, or their why is very shallow. They're doing it because they want to look good, not because they actually want to do good. So
Right.
for us, it's very much starting with the why, and no business is the same. So not every framework that exists out there for ESG or DEI is going to work for every business. It's about picking the right initiatives and strategies to employ for each individual business that's going to work for them. And of course, matching that resource, that budget, that appetite um, to be able to proceed. The other thing is having a look at what we call your area of debt.
Okay.
So if I give you an example, so let's say you're in manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite likely that one of your larger areas of debt are going to be in emissions.
Yeah.
So if that's one of your larger areas of debt, that's where we would start with our focus. What can we do to minimize? What can we do to support a strategy that's going to reduce those emissions over time and create a more sustainable approach to that practice? So it's about looking at the areas of most depth first of all, and they, as I say, they can be different for every business.
Mm.
That authenticity within engagement is super important, and we spoke about the inverted pyramid and about getting buy-in from all sorts of perspectives within stakeholders.
Yeah.
It's really important to get authentic engagement, because if you get people just turning up because they've been told to turn up, and you get people just saying something because they think it's the right thing to say, you will end up with shit, with rubbish. So providing opportunities for individuals to feel that they can um, input their viewpoints safely and input their viewpoints because they're going to be heard and they're going to contribute towards change and progress is really, really important. And again, I think that's where a lot of organisations that are trying um, possibly fail because they're not allowing that voice um, to come through. So continuous feedback is super important. That transparency and keeping
Yeah.
people updated with changes that are happening. We've all been in those situations where company announcements made, and you're like, well, who decided that? Why didn't we get asked about it? And it's that kind of community transparency that's really important within this type of
Mm.
work. Um, just one of the things that I think is super important is kind of the sticker differentiator for Boxless is brand. So
Okay.
how can an organization align its brand vision, mission, and values with this work? And I think that's the super important piece, right? Because every organization is going to have a North Star that they're trying to achieve. But what can we include in that journey to the North Star that's going to be good for the planet and good for people? And they're not massively
Yeah.
difficult things to ask, but they're not being asked. And it's kind of a saying that I've started to repeat myself quite frequently is businesses that want success are not looking for them in the places that they should be, and this is one of the places they should be looking. Um, and I think there's really a lot that can be unpacked and contribute towards not just longevity and sustainability for businesses, but
Mm.
success for better outcomes. They've just got to look in the places that they haven't looked before.
And innovation, innovation comes from getting feedback and insights from a diverse cultures, backgrounds, sectors,
Yep.
whatever it is. It's
Yep.
that's how we drive innovation. So focusing on a slightly more positive angle there, are there any brands out there that you do see who are kind of living that um, best practice approach and actually driving impact in how they're targeting ESG and DEI, whether that's someone you've worked with or just a kind of well-known brand?
Yeah. So what I'll do is I won't highlight brands. What I'll
Yeah,
do is I'll highlight a framework that I think everyone's now
great.
starting to hear about and become a bit more familiar with, which is B Corp. Um,
Okay.
uh, so, so what I will say about B Corp,
Hmm.
it's very, very hard to achieve, and it should be, right?
Right.
But what it does is it set a benchmark. It sets a standard for organisations to reach for, to aim for, across their people and planet responsibilities.
Yeah.
Um, I have some concerns about the B Corp practice because
Mm.
typically in this type of landscape, something else is going to come out and say it's better and it's more ethical and it's and the other thing is it's expensive and it takes a long time to achieve, and that can be off-putting for a lot of the smaller organizations that may not have that resource, that budget, that buy-in
Mm.
from leadership that we spoke about at the beginning. But certainly in terms of a framework, it's actually really refreshing now to see something out there from B Lab, are the organization behind the B
Yeah.
Corp certification. But it's refreshing to see something out there that organizations go, okay, there is a bit of guidance here, and there's different ways that organizations can interact with that. So they can take the impact assessment, it's roughly 200 questions, which will give them an understanding of where they sit in comparison to others with the certification.
Yeah.
um, there's numerous different ways that organizations can start to understand what it is they want to achieve, rather than just this finger in the air, let's give money to this charity and let's recycle plastic in the office and we're done.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to it.
Good. So,
um,
yeah, because I think often like those types of things can feel a little bit like a one size fits all. Do you meet these requirements? Bang! This is the way forward. This is how to tackle sustainability or tackle diversity. Do you believe in a kind of one size fits all approach, or what's your if you were to go into a company, today and what's your kind of
Yeah, I wouldn't say I don't believe in a one size fits all
Mm.
approach. There just isn't one available. Um,
Right.
and again, referencing the B Corp
Mm.
certification, it's expensive and it takes a long time. So you need dedicated resource and a budget,
Yeah.
and not all businesses are going to be able to do that. And they may have the best will in the world. They may really want to do it, but it's
Mm.
just out of reach. It's out of touch. And one of the dangers with that is then you have bigger organisations that do have the budget
Of
and do
course.
have the resource that are able to gain the certification, but actually may not be the most moral and ethical businesses out there. But because
Mm.
they've got the budget and they've got the resource, they're able to do what needs to be done to achieve it. So that's the kind of the risk element I think with it um,
Yeah.
that concerns me slightly. And I think that would be the same thing if we were looking at a one size fits all approach. It would need to be quite dynamic to take into consideration the uniqueness within businesses.
Yeah.
I'm in favour of what we're starting to see with compliance and legislation is industry specific requirements.
Okay.
So the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which was passed by European Parliament in April this year,
Yes.
is targeting businesses that operate within Europe, including those in the UK that do business in Europe.
Hmm.
It's a bit like the GDPR scenario. It's tackling the bigger corporations first. So that's any organisation with 1,000 or more employees or a turnover of 450 million euros plus.
Yeah.
And there's a load of requirements in there now that they need to adhere to. Modern slavery statement,
Of
for
course.
example,
Mm.
and I guess a good example of that is many might think, oh, we just need a modern slavery statement policy. Off we go, create one, stick it up, we're good. It doesn't work like that, and that's where I'm starting to see um, some real impact behind this. So to to be compliant in that area, it now means that everybody in your supply chain needs to adhere and have a modern slavery statement as well. So there's a bit more emphasis behind it now.
Yeah.
for some of those in the supply chain, which may be smaller businesses. In order to continue with those relationships, we'll have to adhere to those same practices. So we are going to see that start to come through. We're going to see compliance and legislation come through. We've got the 2050 net zero strategy here in the UK. That's not going anywhere despite the changing government.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot out there at the moment that is coming and is going to impact business. So it's a great time for organisations to start looking at how they're going to adopt a strategy and what they're going to do to make those changes and be ready for these things.
Definitely. And then just quickly on the certifications again, we mentioned B Corp there, which is more focused around sustainability. That is there anything out there in terms of legislation around the DEI that you think is either kind of there, or is it that might be kind of touching the same kind of points as B Corp, but more around the diversity side of things?
Yeah, so there was an update to the Equality Act 2010
Mm,
earlier this year that's now in place, and a lot of that was around the definitions
mm,
and impact of things like discrimination. So I'd actually encourage HR and employers to take a good look at that because
yeah.
I was actually at a seminar last week with a legal firm talking about a lot of the discrimination cases that they've been dealing with where organisations weren't aware of their responsibilities when it came to things like discrimination.
Wow.
Um, so there's we talk about the nine protected characteristics. There's always going to be conversation and murmurs about more being introduced.
Mm-hmm.
For example, socioeconomic background is not a protected characteristic. I think it should be. Um, so I think there's more now that's in place, but the missing part, the bit that needs work and is
Mm-hmm.
will start to come through, is enforcing it.
Yeah. And how? Yeah. What does that look like?
Yeah.
Yeah, especially in a kind of company level and then a wider level. The current culture politically, there's a lot of mistrust. Do you think that there are any pledges or anything that is kind of helping reshape how companies approach that? Things that people can kind of stand by and feel like their company is doing what needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what I said earlier,
Mm,
it's engaging with your stakeholder
yeah,
community, all right, to get that diverse and wide variety of perspectives.
yeah.
So at Boxless, we partner with a platform called EFI, which is a sustainability platform.
Okay.
And what EFI does, which we really like, is it's it's a way for organisations that want to start their journey, want to start their people and
Right.
planet journey, to get accreditation for their efforts. Because another big area that we haven't touched on is washing. Lots of brands out there saying and claiming that they do lots of things,
Yeah.
but there's no sort of substance and reality behind it. And we see everything from greenwashing, whitewashing, rainbow washing,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it. What Effie does is it provides a clear
Mm-hmm.
set of instructions and guidance for you to evidence your sustainability claims. And in return, you get a digital badge that you're able to display on your marketing, on your branding, that communicates with the audience what efforts you are actually doing and that they've been approved by the FE platform. So there are some things out there for those organizations that are new to this, that are starting their journey, that don't necessarily have huge budgets or resource to really start building that solid foundation and framework for in readiness for this compliance and legislation that we're speaking about that's coming down the road.
Absolutely. We'll put the link to that in the show notes. Um, you talked there a little bit on kind of stakeholder engagement again, and one of the things I've noticed with you, Bud, is that outside of the business side with Boxless and your other endeavours, you also focus a lot on community projects, specifically around these topics you're passionate about. So I mentioned at the top there's Barco and Men of Melanin. What do you feel like the impact of these types of initiatives is having on the business sector. And can you just give us a little bit of a roundup of what those two specific projects are?
Yeah, so I'll answer your question back to front. So
Yeah, sorry.
the two organisations I'm involved, well, the two organisations that I'm founder of. So one is called
Mm.
Barco, which is an acronym for Black Anti-Racism Community Organisation.
Mm-hmm.
In a nutshell, that was born out of activism. So we're talking 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, um, and this heightened social awareness about, oh shit, is that how it is for black people? Was kind of why that started. And also within Brighton, within Sussex, we are the only black led organisation that exists. And yeah, for me, I'm born in Brighton. I'll be 40 this year. And I find it staggering that there hasn't been a black led organisation
Yeah.
to support black people in Brighton. There's kind of a myth here that there are no black people in Brighton. So we're approaching year 4 now, and yeah, you know, there was a necessity to have that.
Mm.
Men of Melanin is a support group for men of colour, and similarly, from lived experience, having my own mental health challenges previously, and friends, family, and
Mm.
seeing some of those struggles, um, I was quite interested to see if there was support from men of colour. As you may or may not know, within sort of counselling and psychology, therapists, it's very female dominated, and it's white dominated as well.
Yeah.
So being able to have that comfort to speak to someone that looks like you and may have had similar experiences to you wasn't quite there. So together with the co-founder Cameron Okai, we decided to create a safe space for men of colour to talk. And yeah, we're just over a year old now, and we are growing month by month by month. There's a real need out there. Um, it's no secret that the biggest killer in men under 45 is suicide, and I've started to use that stat differently now because I think it gets diluted when you go, oh, the biggest killer in men under 45 is suicide. To put that into context, that's about 18 men a day
Oof.
taking their own lives.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
is
again, yeah, just to have acknowledgement that there isn't something out there for men of color who
mm.
are experiencing poor mental health or may have suicidal thoughts. It was kind of eye opening that support systems aren't necessarily where they should be. So yeah, if it ain't there, do it yourself. Is kind of the mantra that
Yeah.
I've gone with. But the first part of your question, in terms of why they're important, well,
Mm.
I, for me, grassroots organisations within community are massive. I think it's the glue that builds community.
Yeah.
Um, if we look at the state all the time to do things for us, it probably won't get done, and that's evidence with both Barco and the Men of Melanin. So
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in grassroots movements, in action, in changing what's on your doorstep as your way to making an impact on the world.
Mm.
I think we can get disheartened, and particularly when we talk about sustainability, pollution, emissions, the environment, it can
Mm.
feel like it's a losing battle. There's a lot of negativity around it. But actually, if we all make small changes, the gross impact of that is massive. So I'm very much a believer of trying to change what's in your household, on your doorstep, in your community, in your circle, as a way of making positive impact.
I suppose when I said like important, obviously there's a definite need for it, and there's a real reason why it's important. I
Mm,
was more kind of focusing on, as you said earlier, the structures there. Even just in counselling, where it's female led and white led, it's how how are you seeing the kind of impact of something like Barco, where you've already had that over 4 years, where like I said earlier about diversity being the kind of driver of innovation. Are you moving anything forward in terms of bringing those diverse voices and actually changing, as you say, the leadership structure of if it's a business, if it's a city, and then who knows what next, if we get regional, national, international, of actually kind of changing those leadership values by working in these community structures that?
Yeah. So the the simple answer is no. But the longer answer is we are starting to.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily say that the root uh, um, reason for Barco or Men of Melanin forming has anything to do with business,
No.
or trying to improve diversity within business. It's very much both were very much built to serve a specific need.
Absolutely.
However, they are tied intangibly in some way, shape, or form because, as an example, people may be experiencing these negative thoughts because of how they're treated at work.
Of course.
So there is a relationship. More recently, there's kind of a coalition and a collective that's forming in Brighton to try and tackle diversity because Brighton is viewed positively for its inclusivity efforts, but actually those inclusivity efforts are very much around the LGBTQ plus
Absolutely.
community.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that they've got it right there because I have lots of friends and colleagues in that space who tell me how terrible it still is. But that reputation for Brighton is very much that it's this welcoming and inclusive and accepting place, and therefore it gets this stamp of approval that Brighton is inclusive. But it's not inclusive to people of colour. I've been working in this corporate landscape in Sussex, South East London over the last 15 years. There's very, very, very few people of colour in that space. One of the revelations I've had recently is I have a role with Soho House, where I'm their inclusivity representative for the Brighton location.
Yeah.
And it's the first time in my working career that I've had a boss who is black and who is gay, which I think is quite phenomenal, really.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that individual isn't from Brighton. That it's a global network, and that person's based in the US. But I think it's quite remarkable when we look at who's in the positions of power. It's the same people over and over again. So why am I raising that? Why is it important? Because it's these community initiatives and it's the conversations that we're having and bringing those community initiatives closer together with business, with commercial relationships, that we're going to see some diversity happen. If we don't, it will be the same people making the same decisions, doing the same things over and over again. So I do see it starting to have some impact, but it certainly wasn't. We didn't set out with this goal to change and improve diversity within the corporate sector. It's very much to provide a service and a need um, for those purposes.
And nor should they. It's, as you say, grassroots starts and it comes back to what you said earlier of what's the why. Why did you set Barco up? Why did you set Men of Melanin up? That should be the approach. But it's positive to hear that there is that kind of it's growing outside of that, and the more tendrils that can spread out, the more that businesses come online, the more that co-working spaces, people in power, councils, all of that stuff, like you said, Soho House, somewhere where lots of businesses are kind of seeing the work that's being done. That's a really positive step, and I think it's only through community and, as you say, hearing from diverse stakeholders, hearing from all types of stakeholders, and that's across all the spectrums that we've talked about, all the different job titles, not just leaders, getting 3 leaders in a room. It's really engaging all the different staff, and it's important to hear that is happening. And
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, and just on that, and I don't know how much you can go into this, but I've noticed that Boxless is set its sights on Boxless World, which I believe is a peer-led sharing platform around the topics of ESG and DEI. And I know it's only in its early stages, but is there any insights you can give us into how that could kind of support what we just talked about in terms of community, sharing, stakeholder engagement, etc.?
What can I share? Because I'm under NDA on a couple of these bits and pieces. So, um, okay, so this is what I can share. So,
Mhm.
Boxless.world is a tech platform,
Yeah.
and it's capturing sentiment and voice in a
Okay.
way that hasn't been done before. Um, so it
Nice.
aligns very, very well with what we've been speaking about,
Mm.
and yeah, I'm quite excited about it. I'd like to share more. I'd like to share more. I don't think I should at this moment. I'm
No,
in lots of conversations about raising capital investment, and it's probably not the right time for me to share.
no problem.
But watch this space because there is a lot of movement happening with that at the moment.
Absolutely, and it's just exciting to hear that developments like this are being made. A company like yours, which is relatively young, is already kind of setting its sights on innovations like that, and pushing forward in that space.
Yeah, certainly. I think we are in a digital age,
Mm.
and um, there's a lot of mistrust out there, particularly with social channels.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of risk, as we know, with with social challenges, particularly with with younger audiences.
Hmm.
So I'm really excited about I'm really excited about Boxless World and what it can do. So yeah, maybe we follow up with that in
Definitely.
a few
Very
months' time.
very exciting, bud. Really appreciate your time today, and just at the end, kind of giving people a bit of a positive or a negative note to go away with of ESG, DEI, clearly major topics in 2024. It's great that they are still being talked about. I think, you mentioned earlier 2020, there's a little bit of a drop off in some sectors
Mm.
from that kind of initial focus on diversity and sustainability. But how do you see the next 5 years? What does it look like in terms of both these really essential topics for people and profit for businesses?
Yeah, there's a couple of bits. So the new workforce, millennials, Gen Z, okay,
Yeah.
their way of doing things is different. Um, we talked about these sort of bad habits that have been absorbed from the industrial revolution, and um, what's important to Gen Z and millennials
Hmm.
is that their values are mirrored with brands that they work for, buy from, support. And if organizations are not adopting and understanding that now, they will fade out. And there's going to be a lot that fade out because they're too slow to react or don't believe in it. This is conceptual stuff to a degree. So for many traditional organizations to understand what to do and the value, it may seem too daunting and therefore they don't put the effort in. They will
Yeah.
fade out. So there's a new audience coming through with new expectations. That's the first thing. And businesses, organizations need to make changes to meet um, and accept what's expected. Um, we spoke earlier about compliance and legislation. That's going to come through more and more and more, and um, particularly I think with some of the um, environmental responsibilities, we're going to see some quite dramatic changes. I think as people continue talking about the environment and the impacts that emissions CO2 are having on the planet, I think we're going to see some quite dramatic sanctions and legislation coming through. We talk about DEI and that kind of social pillar and this kind of heightened social awareness and expectations of millennials and Gen Z. Um, with the since the hybrid working has become the norm, I
Mm.
think we're going to see a bit more standardization in what's expected, and coupling that with the updates and changes that we've seen to the Equalities Act, I certainly think that we're going to start to see that enforced more, and people are going to understand what their rights are in that space and
Yeah.
exercise them. So I'd expect that to be hot topic for a lot longer. And as much as I've been criticising that we had this sort of wave post 2020 of, you know, this is really bad and we need to do something about it. And lots of organisations putting pledges out there and statements and posting black squares on social media, and it's faded away. I think what we're seeing now with some of the stuff that's happened in the background is that's going to pick back up. It's going to pick back up, and organisations are going to have to get their acts together. Certainly, those that haven't made any efforts, or those that made pledges and statements and haven't done anything about it, which is difficult. I also think as well, there's organisations that are now starting to use data to be able to evidence the impact of this work. So McKinsey, you've got Gallup's State of the Global Workplace. There's data out there, Harvard Business studies. There's lots of data and research out there that is evidencing when organisations take these responsibilities seriously and have positive impact, what that does for a business in terms of commercial success. So I think we're going to see more of that coming through, which is great because it will be persuasive for organisations that sit on the fence or are unsure of why they should get started. So I do see some positive things coming through, but I also see there may be one or two negative things. So there's climate deniers, and that's a voice, and it's a strong voice out there, unfortunately. And I think there's also a kind of political element to some of the social and ethical things that millennials and Gen Z are talking about, and that people reference woke culture in a very, very negative way. And I think we're going to continue to see some of that, unfortunately. But overall, I feel that everything is going in a much better direction, and keep having the conversations. I urge employees to keep speaking to their employers about what they expect. It's the voices, it's that kind of momentum that will create the change.
Absolutely. Bud, it's great to finish on a positive note. And if any businesses listening or individuals working for the companies, how can they get in touch with yourself and Boxless? Where can people find you?
Yeah, just come to our website, which is www.boxless.uk. You can book a free consultation call. As I mentioned earlier, this is to a lot of people, this is quite conceptual stuff. So, we like to have a conversation to understand what it is you're trying to achieve and how we may be able to support. And in a nutshell, we want to be that leadership and that resource for you to be able to reach those milestones and set that solid foundation up. There is no one size fits all for everyone, and we certainly think that we can find the best way forwards for organisations. And we are in our infancy, but we've kind of hit with a splash, and we've got clients in 4 or 5 different sectors already. So that learning can be brought on and shared with anybody that comes on and works with us. So please do reach out. Always happy to have a conversation. Always happy to see how we can help.
Brilliant. Thanks for taking your time, Bud.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. Powerful insights into the world of business and what lies ahead. Thank you to all our Change Shapers listeners for tuning into our podcast, and to our guest today for sharing their knowledge with our community. Our episodes are designed to spark conversation and start collaborations. So if you're interested by what you heard, then please share with your colleagues or on social media and join the chat with our guest today. Change Shapers is part of the Casaris brand, and we can be found on LinkedIn. Just search for COSARIS, or on Instagram as Change Shapers Podcast. Please subscribe, rate and review Change Shapers Podcast. We can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you find your favourite pods. I've been Jay Taylor. Let's turn uncertainty into opportunity together. Catch you in the next episode.